The flicker of a diamond is meant to symbolize forever a promise of love eternal. But for Victoria Vance, the massive rock on her finger was a trophy, a declaration of a victory hard won. As she held her hand aloft, the stone catching the light of the chandeliers, a triumphant smirk played on her lips. She was about to marry Ethan Hayes, the city's most eligible and now available widower. The crowd murmured their congratulations, their faces a mixture of envy and admiration. They were celebrating the end of a tragedy and the beginning of a new dynasty. But some promises are built on lies, and some endings are not endings at all. In just a few seconds, the doors to this grand hall would swing open, and a ghost from the past would walk in, proving that a diamond can also be the hardest part of a gilded cage, just before it shatters into a million pieces. The Hayes estate in Aspen Grove was a monument to old money and new ambition. Sprawling lawns manicured to perfection rolled down to a private lake that shimmered under the late afternoon sun. Tonight, however, the estate's serene beauty was merely a backdrop for a spectacle of human drama. Inside the grand ballroom, hundreds of the city's elite were gathered for the engagement party of Ethan Hayes and Victoria Vance. Ethan Hayes, with his tailored suit and disarmingly charming smile, moved through the crowd like a prince in his court. He was the sole heir to the Hayes fortune, a real estate empire built by his father. To the world, he was the grieving widower, a man who had tragically lost his pregnant wife, Chloe, in a horrific boating accident just 6 months prior. He had played the part well, the public appearances with red-rimmed eyes, the somber interviews, the generous donation to the Coast Guard in Chloe's name. Tonight marked his official return to society, and on his arm was Victoria Vance, a woman who seemed crafted from ambition and designer labels. Her red dress was a slash of crimson against the room's muted golds and creams, her laughter a little too loud, her grip on Ethan's arm a little too tight. She was the vice president of acquisitions at Ethan's company, a position many whispered she'd earned through means other than professional merit. To Ethan and Victoria, a guest toasted lifting a champagne flute. The room echoed the sentiment. Victoria's smile was blinding. She raised her left hand, ostensibly, to tuck a strand of blonde hair behind her ear, but the movement was calculated. Every eye in the room was drawn to the diamond on her ring finger. It wasn't just a ring, it was a statement. A pear-shaped diamond easily 10 carats flanked by smaller emeralds, a gaudy masterpiece of wealth and possession. "It's breathtaking," Victoria commented, a woman dripping in pearls, her eyes wide. "Ethan has impeccable taste." Victoria purred loud enough for those around her to hear. She turned to Ethan's mother, Eleanor Hayes, a woman with a face as hard and unforgiving as the marble statues in her foyer. "He told me it was a family heirloom reset for me, a new beginning for an old legacy." Eleanor gave a thin, approving smile. She had never been fond of Chloe, whom she considered too soft, too ordinary for the Hayes dynasty. Chloe had been a gentle soul, a librarian with a love for classic literature and quiet evenings. Victoria, with her sharp edges and social climbing prowess, was much more to Eleanor's liking. "It suits you, my dear," Eleanor said, her voice crisp. "It's time this family had some good news. Time we moved on from the unpleasantness." The unpleasantness was the official term for Chloe's disappearance. She and Ethan had been sailing on their yacht, the Serenity, when a sudden squall hit. According to Ethan's harrowing account, a rogue wave had swept Chloe 8 months pregnant from the deck. He'd searched for hours, nearly succumbing to hypothermia himself before being rescued. Despite a massive search effort, no body was ever found. She was declared dead in absentia 3 months later, a process expedited by the Hayes family's considerable influence. Ethan squeezed Victoria's hand, his expression a perfect blend of lingering sorrow and newfound hope. Chloe would have wanted me to be happy," he said, his voice thick with practiced emotion. The crowd sighed sympathetically. He was so brave. Victoria seized the moment. She stepped onto the small dais where the band was taking a break, tapping a champagne glass for attention. The room fell silent. "I just want to say a few words," she began, her voice resonating with theatrical sincerity. "When I first met Ethan, he was a broken man. The weight of his loss was a storm cloud I wasn't sure he'd ever escape." She paused, looking at him with what was supposed to be adoration. But his strength, his resilience, it inspired me. And slowly, out of the deepest tragedy, something beautiful began to grow. She held up her hand again, letting the diamond catch the spotlight. "This ring isn't just a promise of our future. It's a symbol of hope. It's proof that even after the darkest storm, the sun can shine again." A polite yet enthusiastic round of applause filled the room. Ethan joined her on the dais, kissing her passionately as cameras flashed. It was a perfect picture, a PR-managed fairy tale. But fairy tales often have villains, and sometimes the princesses they leave for dead don't stay that way. At the back of the ballroom, the grand oak doors, which had been closed to keep the evening air from chilling the guests, creaked open. A single figure stood silhouetted against the fading twilight. She was gaunt, her face pale and etched with a weariness that went beyond physical exhaustion. Her clothes were simple, a worn dress that hung loosely on her frame, a stark contrast to the couture inside. But what made every jaw in the room drop, what made the champagne flutes freeze halfway to lips, was the unmistakable, pronounced swell of her stomach. She took a hesitant step into the light. Her brown hair was shorter than they remembered, and a faint silvery scar cut across her temple. Her eyes, wide and haunted, scanned the stunned faces until they landed on the couple on the dais. A collective gasp, sharp and sudden, sucked the air from the room. The music, which had just started to swell again, faltered into a discordant screech as the violinist's bow skittered across the strings. It was Ethan's business partner, Robert, who broke the silence, his voice a choked whisper that carried across the cavernous space. "My God, it's Chloe." The woman in the red dress. Victoria stared, her face a mask of disbelief that quickly curdled into pure, unadulterated horror. Her triumphant smile vanished, replaced by a ghastly sneer of confusion and rage. Ethan's reaction was the most telling. His charming facade didn't just crack, it shattered. The color drained from his face, leaving behind a waxy, pallid sheen. His arm, which had been wrapped possessively around Victoria, fell to his side as if it had been burned. His eyes, wide with a terror that was anything but grief-stricken relief, were locked on the pregnant woman standing in the doorway. He looked not at a long-lost love, but at a ghost who had come back to drag him to hell. And in that moment, as Chloe Hazen took another shaky step into the room, her hand resting protectively on her unborn child, everyone present knew one thing for certain. The storm wasn't over. It had just begun. The silence in the ballroom was a physical entity, heavy and suffocating. For a full 10 seconds, the only sound was the frantic, panicked beating of three hearts, Ethan's, Victoria's, and Chloe's. The hundreds of guests were statues, their faces a gallery of shock and morbid curiosity. Chloe's eyes, which had been scanning the room with a dazed uncertainty, finally found Ethan. A flicker of recognition of pain crossed her face. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. She looked frail like a phantom that a strong gust of wind could dissipate, yet her presence had the force of a battering ram smashing the carefully constructed reality of the evening. It was Victoria who moved first. Her disbelief morphed into a snarl. "What is this? What kind of sick joke is this?" she hissed, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. She turned on Ethan, her eyes blazing. "Ethan, who is that? It's some imposter, right?" But Ethan couldn't answer. He was paralyzed, his mind racing, trying to compute the impossible. He had been so careful. The storm, the timing, the way he'd disabled the boat's GPS and distress beacon. He'd seen her go over the railing into the churning black water. No one could have survived that. He had spent a fortune ensuring her disappearance was permanent. Yet there she was, alive and still pregnant. His mother, Eleanor, recovered her composure with the chilling speed of a true matriarch. She glided forward, her expression a mask of cold fury. "Security!" She called out, her voice ringing with authority. "Remove this dumb person. She is clearly unwell and trespassing." Two burly men in black suits started to move toward Chloe, but she held up a trembling hand. Her voice, when it finally came, was raspy thin, yet it carried an unnerving clarity. "Ethan." The name hung in the air, an accusation and a plea all in one. It shattered the illusion that she was a stranger, a prankster. This was Chloe Hayes. Ethan finally found his voice, a strangled, croaking sound. "Chloe, it can't be you." He stumbled down from the dais, his movements jerky, uncoordinated. He was a puppet whose strings had been cut. We searched for you. Everyone said you were gone." Chloe took another step, her gaze never leaving his. "Gone was I." She touched the scar on her temple, a gesture that seemed unconscious. I don't remember everything." This was the first twist of the knife, and Chloe delivered it with an Oscar-worthy performance of a confused, vulnerable victim. "There was a boat, a storm. The water was so cold." Her eyes welled with tears, but they were not tears of weakness. They were the tools of her trade. "And then, nothing, for a long time. I woke up in a small clinic on the coast. They said a fisherman found me washed ashore. I couldn't remember my name. My own name." A murmur of pity rippled through the crowd. The narrative was shifting. This wasn't a malicious ghost. This was a miracle survivor, a victim of amnesia. "I've spent months in physical therapy and counseling." Chloe continued, her voice gaining a little strength. "They called it dissociative amnesia. The trauma was too great. But then a few weeks ago, a name came back to me. Ethan Hayes. I saw your picture in a magazine article about the tragedy." She flinched as she said the word. "I knew I had to find you. I knew you were my home." She looked past Ethan, then her gaze landing squarely on Victoria. Her eyes drifted down to the woman's left hand, to the colossal diamond ring that seemed to burn with stolen fire. Chloe's brow furrowed in a heartbreakingly believable expression of confusion. Who is this?" she asked, her voice a whisper of pure innocence. The question was a masterstroke. It painted Victoria not as a partner, but as an intruder, an opportunist, feasting on the spoils of a tragedy. Victoria's face flushed a deep, ugly red. "I am his fiancée," she snapped, stepping forward. "We're getting married. You were dead. Fiancé." Chloe's eyes widened, a picture of devastation. She looked back at Ethan, her expression crumbling. "Ethan, she says you're getting married. But I'm your wife. I'm carrying your child." She placed both hands on her belly, a primal, protective gesture that resonated with every woman in the room. The tide of public opinion fickle as it was turned completely. The guests were no longer just spectators, they were a jury. Whispers erupted like wildfire. "My God, the poor woman has amnesia." And he was so quick to move on. That Victoria Vance always seemed like a viper. He couldn't even wait a year, and with his wife's baby on the way. Ethan was trapped. Denying Chloe would make him look like a monster, but accepting her meant his new life with Victoria, and more importantly, the $5 million life insurance policy he'd just collected on Chloe was in jeopardy. He had to play the part. He rushed to Chloe's side, wrapping his arms around her. It was meant to look like a tender reunion, but to Chloe, his touch felt like ice. She had to fight every instinct to recoil. "Chloe, my love, I can't believe it," he stammered, his voice choked with feigned emotion. He turned to the stunned crowd. "It's a miracle my wife is alive." He then looked at Victoria, his eyes pleading for her to play along. "Victoria, this is my wife, Chloe, the one I told you about." Victoria looked as if she'd been slapped. The man who had promised her the world was now embracing the ghost who had come to reclaim it. Her engagement party had just become the scene of her own public humiliation. The diamond on her finger felt less like a trophy and more like a shackle. Eleanor Hayes, ever the strategist, saw the PR disaster unfolding. She quickly stepped in, her voice smooth as silk. "This is a profound shock to us all. My daughter-in-law has been through an unimaginable ordeal. She needs rest, not a spectacle." She began ushering people towards the exit. "Thank you all for coming, but as you can understand, this is a private family matter." As the guests were herded out, their minds buzzing with the scandal of the decade, Chloe allowed Ethan to lead her towards a sitting room off the main hall. She leaned on him, playing the part of the weak, confused survivor. But as his back was turned to the last of the departing crowd, her eyes clear and cold as a winter lake met her sister Jessica's across the room. Jessica, who had been waiting near the service entrance, gave a subtle, almost imperceptible nod. Chloe's amnesia was a lie. A carefully constructed, brilliantly executed lie. She remembered everything. She remembered the argument on the boat, the look in Ethan's eyes, not of panic, but of cold calculation. She remembered the feel of his hands on her back as he pushed her into the raging sea. And she had spent the last 6 months not in a fog of amnesia, but in a quiet coastal town planning her revenge. This was not a homecoming. This was a declaration of war, and she had just won the first battle without shedding a single drop of blood. 6 months earlier, the world had been a different color for Chloe Hayes. It was the vibrant blue of the Aegean Sea, the crisp white of the yacht sails, and the warm gold of the sun on her skin. She and Ethan were on their second anniversary trip, a baby moon, before their son was due. To any outsider, they were the perfect couple, blessed with wealth, looks, and a future full of promise. But beneath the gilded surface, cracks had begun to form. Chloe, a former research librarian, was an observer by nature. She had noticed the subtle shifts in Ethan, the late-night business calls he would take out on the veranda, the way his eyes would glaze over when she spoke of baby names or nursery decorations. He had become distant, his charm a veneer that was wearing thin, revealing something cold and hard beneath. She'd tried to talk to him, but he'd brushed off her concerns with expensive gifts and hollow promises. He'd told her this trip was to reconnect, to get back to how they were. Chloe, ever the optimist, had wanted to believe him. The argument started over something trivial, a misplaced satellite phone. But it escalated with unnatural speed. Ethan's frustration seemed too immense for the situation. "I just don't understand how you can be so careless, Chloe." He'd snapped, his voice sharp. "It's just a phone, Ethan. We can find it. Why are you so upset?" She'd asked, her hand resting on her swollen belly. The baby was kicking, agitated by the tension in her mother's body. "Because it's not just a phone. It's about responsibility, something you seem to know little about." The cruelty of his words stung. "Responsibility? I'm the one reading every book on childbirth and infant care while you're out until 2 a.m. closing deals." That's when he'd let it slip. "Maybe if you were more focused on our life and less on your sentimental nonsense, I wouldn't need so many deals." His eyes darted away, but she saw it. Guilt. "What does that mean, Ethan?" She pressed, a cold dread seeping into her veins. "What deals?" The weather had turned as quickly as the conversation. Dark clouds boiled on the horizon, and the calm sea began to churn. The wind picked up, whipping Chloe's hair across her face. Ethan's face was a mask of fury. "It means this perfect life isn't free. It means my father's legacy is on the brink, and I've been doing whatever it takes to keep us afloat." "Whatever it takes?" Chloe's heart hammered against her ribs. She remembered the hushed phone calls, the name Victoria she'd overheard. Is Victoria Vance part of whatever it takes? His head snapped up. The look on his face was all the confirmation she needed. The affair was real, but it was more than that. She could see it in the cold, dead light of his eyes. This was about business. Victoria wasn't just a lover. She was a partner in some scheme. The first wave crashed over the deck, soaking them both. The yacht lurched violently. "We need to get below deck, Ethan," Chloe cried, grabbing a railing for support. He advanced on her, his handsome face twisted into an unrecognizable sneer. "You know I was wondering how I was going to do this. I thought I'd have to wait until we got back. Make it look like an accident at home. But this is perfect." "Do what?" Chloe whispered, terror clawing at her throat. "Ethan, you're scaring me." "There's an insurance policy, Chloe," he said, his voice eerily calm amidst the roaring wind and crashing waves. "A very, very generous one. Enough to solve all my problems. And with a grieving widower clause, it pays out double." The horror of his words was absolute. This wasn't just infidelity or financial trouble. This was premeditated. He had brought her out here to kill her, to kill their child. She tried to run to scramble away, but on the slick, heaving deck, she was no match for him. He grabbed her arm, his grip like iron. The boat pitched again, and she stumbled. "Goodbye, Chloe," he said, his voice devoid of all emotion. And then he pushed her. The fall felt like an eternity. The impact with the glacial, churning water stole her breath. She was pulled under the weight of her wet clothes and the baby dragging her down into the crushing blackness. Her last conscious thought was of her unborn son, a primal scream of a mother's love lost in the abyss. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. Hours later, a reclusive fisherman named Samuel, checking his lobster pots after the squall had passed, saw a flash of colour in the water. He steered his small, weathered trawler closer, expecting to find debris from the storm. Instead, he found a woman, barely conscious, clinging to a splintered piece of the yacht's railing. He pulled her aboard, his old muscles straining. She was hypothermic, battered, and barely breathing. He saw the scar on her temple where her head must have struck the railing as she fell. He was a man who had spent his life avoiding the complications of the world, but he couldn't leave her to die. He took her to the small, isolated cottage he called home on a nearby sparsely populated island. He and his wife, Martha, a retired nurse, nursed Chloe back to health. When she awoke days later, the physical trauma had triggered a protective amnesia. She knew she was pregnant, a deep instinct that transcended memory. But her name, her past, her husband's face, it was all a blank, terrifying void. Samuel and Martha, wary of the outside world, cared for her. They didn't have a television and rarely read the news. To them, she was simply Jane, the woman from the sea. For 3 months, Chloe lived in a quiet haze, her body healing as she prepared for the birth of her child. The fear of the unknown was a constant companion. Then one day, on a rare trip to the mainland for supplies, Martha brought back a newspaper to wrap fish in. An old financial section, months out of date. As Chloe sat at their simple wooden table, her eyes fell on a small picture. A man with a charming smile accepting a philanthropic award. Ethan Hayes. The name was a key unlocking a door in her mind. And through that door flooded a torrent of horrifying memories. The argument, the coldness in his eyes, the push, the icy water. It all came back in a rush so violent it nearly sent her into premature labor. Her amnesia wasn't gone, but the wall had been breached. The core of the truth was there. Her husband had tried to murder her. In that moment, the soft, trusting Chloe died, and a woman, forged in betrayal and tempered by a lust for justice, was born. She knew she couldn't just go to the police. Ethan was wealthy, powerful. He had created a narrative of a tragic accident. It would be her word, the word of a woman who had been missing and presumed dead against his. He would paint her as unstable, traumatized, delusional. No, she needed to be smarter. She had to dismantle his life from the inside. She confided in Samuel and Martha, who, horrified, pledged their help. She then made one call to the only person in the world she knew would believe her without question, her sister Jessica. Jessica drove for 6 hours straight, her car skidding to a halt outside the small cottage. The reunion was tearful and fierce. Together they planned. The amnesia story was their Trojan horse. It would get her back inside the gates of the Hayes estate. It would allow her to be near Ethan, to watch him, to gather the evidence she needed to destroy him. It was a terrifying gamble. She would have to live with her own murderer, pretending to be a lost, loving wife, all while carrying his child. The child he had tried to consign to a watery grave. Walking into that engagement party was the first move in a deadly game of chess. And as she felt Ethan's arm around her, feigning comfort, she focused on the steady, strong heartbeat of her baby. She was no longer fighting just for herself. She was fighting for two. The days following Chloe's return were a masterclass in psychological warfare, conducted within the suffocatingly opulent walls of the Hayes estate. To the outside world, Ethan played the part of the overjoyed, devoted husband, tending to his miraculously returned amnesiac wife. He gave tearful interviews to select media outlets, speaking of fate miracles and second chances. He was lauded as a hero, a man of unwavering faith. Inside the mansion, the atmosphere was thick with unspoken threats and paranoia. Chloe was a ghost haunting her own home. Every object held a memory she had to pretend not to recognize. The photo from their wedding on the mantelpiece, the collection of vintage poetry books by her bedside, the faint scent of her own perfume still lingering in the walk-in closet, all were props in her elaborate play. She feigned confusion and vulnerability, asking Ethan to tell her stories of their life together. "Tell me about our first date, Ethan," she would ask, her eyes wide with manufactured innocence. He would spin a tale of romance, a carefully edited version of the truth, and she would listen, her heart a block of ice, filing away every lie, every inconsistency. Her feigned memory loss was her shield and her sword. It allowed her to ask questions that a normal wife couldn't. "I was just looking through some papers in your study, trying to remember things," she said one afternoon, holding up a file. "What is this, a life insurance policy for $5 million? Why would we need so much money?" Ethan froze, a deer in the headlights. "It was just a precaution, darling. A responsible thing to do with the baby coming. I never imagined. And this date." She continued, her finger tracing the date the policy was enacted, just 2 weeks before their fateful trip. "It seems so, recent." The broker was very persuasive, he stammered, snatching the papers from her hand with a nervous laugh. "You know how they are. Let's not worry about these grim things. Let's focus on you, on your recovery." Chloe allowed him to lead her away, a submissive smile on her face, but her mind was whirring. She had her first piece of tangible evidence. Meanwhile, Victoria Vance was a caged tigress. Ethan had convinced her to move out of the estate and into a luxury penthouse downtown, framing it as a necessary step to avoid upsetting the fragile Chloe. He promised her it was temporary, that he just needed time to handle the situation. Handle her? What does that mean, Ethan? Victoria had shrieked during one of their clandestine phone calls. "Are you going to let that wraith take everything we've worked for?" "Keep your voice down, Victoria," he'd hissed back. "Do you have any idea how precarious this is? She has amnesia. She's weak. The doctors say any shock could cause a relapse or worse, harm the baby. I have to play the loving husband. Once the baby is born and I can secure full custody, we can prove she's an unfit mother. We can have her committed. Then we can be together. The money will be ours. Just be patient." But patience was not one of Victoria's virtues. She saw her future slipping through her fingers. The Hayes name, the fortune, the social standing, all being reclaimed by a woman she thought was at the bottom of the ocean. Her jealousy and resentment festered, turning into a toxic obsession. Unbeknownst to them, Chloe's sister Jessica was her operative on the outside. A fiercely intelligent cybersecurity analyst, Jessica had been Chloe's rock. While Chloe played the part of the broken doll, Jessica was digging. "I've got something, Chloe," Jessica said, in a hushed tone during one of their secret calls made on a burner phone Chloe kept hidden in a hollowed-out book. "Ethan's company, Hayes Development, is drowning in debt. He took out massive high-risk loans for a new resort project in Dubai, and it's a disaster. He's leveraged everything, including the estate. If he defaults, the family loses it all." "So it was always about the money," Chloe breathed, the cold confirmation settling in her stomach. "Always," Jessica confirmed. "The $5 million policy was just a down payment on his problems. I also did some digging on Victoria. Before she worked for Ethan, she was fired from her last 2 jobs for corporate espionage. She has a history of latching on to powerful men. She's not just a mistress, Chloe, she's a co-conspirator. I found encrypted emails between them dating back a month before the trip. They talk about the project and the final solution. It's all there." The pieces were falling into place. Chloe's return had not only ruined their personal plans, but had also thrown a wrench into their financial escape route. The insurance company, upon learning of Chloe's reappearance, had launched an investigation and frozen the payout. Ethan was desperate. Chloe's next move was to contact the original investigator on her case, Detective Miles Corrigan. He was a veteran cop on the verge of retirement, and her disappearance had always felt wrong to him. He'd been suspicious of Ethan's polished story and rapid recovery, but with no body and no evidence of foul play, his hands were tied. Jessica arranged an anonymous tip. When Corrigan arrived at a quiet coffee shop, he found a plain manila envelope on a table. Inside was a copy of the insurance policy, highlighted with the date of activation, and a printout of one of the less incriminating, but still suspicious emails between Ethan and Victoria. At the bottom was a single typed line. "He pushed her, she remembers." It was enough. Detective Corrigan officially reopened the case of Chloe Hayes' disappearance, citing new evidence. The news sent a quiet shockwave through the Hayes mansion. Ethan confronted Chloe that evening, his charming mask slipping to reveal the panicked man beneath. "The police were here, Chloe. They're asking questions again. Did you say something to them?" Chloe looked up at him from the couch where she was knitting a baby blanket, her expression one of utter bewilderment. "The police? Why did I do something wrong? My memory? It's so patchy. Maybe I said something that confused them when they interviewed me at the hospital." She let a tear roll down her cheek. "Oh, Ethan, I'm so sorry. Am I causing trouble?" Her performance was flawless. She was the picture of innocence, making him feel guilty for even suspecting her. He backed off, reassuring her, but the seed of suspicion was planted. He started watching her more closely. The house was no longer a home. It was a prison with 3 inmates. Chloe, the prisoner, plotting an escape. Ethan, the warden, terrified of being overthrown. And in the background, the ever-present spectre of Victoria, a co-conspirator whose desperation was making her dangerously unpredictable. The web of deceit was tightening, and Chloe knew it was only a matter of time before someone got caught. The pressure cooker environment of the Hayes estate began to take its toll primarily on the conspirators. While Chloe maintained her serene, detached facade of a woman adrift in her own mind, Ethan and Victoria started to unravel. Their clandestine meetings became more frequent and more fraught with tension. "She knows, Ethan, I can feel it," Victoria insisted during a heated argument in his car, parked in a secluded corner of a city park. "The way she looks at me sometimes. It's not confusion, it's hatred." "You're being paranoid." Ethan shot back, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were white. "She's a broken woman. All she does is knit and stare out the window. Corrigan's investigation is just a formality. They have nothing." "They have her," Victoria shrieked, her voice cracking. "She is living, breathing evidence that your plan failed. And what about the money?" The insurance company is clawing back the preliminary payment. Your creditors are calling me Ethan. They think I'm still your fiancé, the future Mrs. Hayes. They're asking me where the money is. Keep your voice down, he commanded, his eyes darting around nervously. I'm handling it. I just need more time. But time was a luxury he didn't have. Chloe, with subtle precision, began to orchestrate scenarios designed to amplify their paranoia and drive a wedge between them. Knowing Victoria was obsessively stalking Ethan's social life, Chloe began posting on a long-dormant Instagram account. She posted a picture of her and Ethan at dinner with the caption, "Slowly making new memories with my wonderful, patient husband. Feeling so blessed." She posted a photo of the nursery they were setting up, filled with expensive gifts Ethan had bought to maintain his public image. Each post was a poisoned dart aimed directly at Victoria's insecurity. Victoria, in turn, would bombard Ethan with furious texts and calls accusing him of replacing her, of falling for Chloe's act. His denials became less convincing, his patience worn thin by the constant stress. The masterstroke came during Eleanor Hayes's annual charity gala, a cornerstone of the city's social calendar. Eleanor had insisted they attend as a family to present a united front and quell the rampant gossip. Chloe, looking radiant in a flowing emerald gown that accentuated her pregnancy, was the picture of gentle resilience. Ethan was on edge all night, forcing smiles and shaking hands, while constantly checking his phone for updates from his lawyers. Chloe stayed by his side, playing the part of the adoring wife beautifully. She knew Victoria would be there. She wasn't invited, but her desperation and audacity would ensure her presence. As predicted, Victoria made her entrance halfway through the evening. She wore a backless silver dress that was both stunning and completely inappropriate for the conservative event. She ignored the shocked whispers and made a beeline for the bar, positioning herself in Ethan's direct line of sight. Chloe chose her moment perfectly. When Ethan was cornered by a group of investors, she approached his mother, Eleanor. "Eleanor, I'm so glad we could come tonight," Chloe began, her voice soft and sincere. "It feels familiar. I think I remember this event from last year." Eleanor gave her a tight, dismissive smile. "I'm sure you do." "I also remember something else," Chloe continued, her brow furrowing as if trying to grasp a fleeting thought. "A woman, blonde. She and Ethan. They seemed very close. Her name was Veronica, no Victoria. That's it. She worked for Ethan. I remember feeling uneasy about her. Isn't that strange? That I would remember that." She looked up at Eleanor, her eyes wide and innocent. Before Eleanor could formulate a response, Chloe let out a soft gasp, her eyes fixing on the bar. "That's her, over there. Why is she looking at Ethan like that?" Eleanor's gaze followed Chloe's. She saw Victoria nursing a martini, her eyes burning with a venomous jealousy as she watched Ethan. The mask of plausible deniability was gone. In this public setting, Victoria's presence was not that of a colleague. It was that of a spurned lover. For Eleanor, whose primary concern was the family's reputation, this was an unforgivable breach of decorum. This was a public spectacle, a threat to the Hayes name. "Excuse me, Chloe," Eleanor said, her voice dropping to a dangerously low temperature. She strode towards the bar, her movements as direct and deadly as a shark. The confrontation was brief but brutal. Though they were too far away for Chloe to hear the words, the body language was clear. Eleanor's cold, imperious posture, Victoria's defensive, then tearful, then enraged gestures. It ended with Victoria slamming her glass on the bar and storming out of the gala, leaving a trail of scandalized whispers in her wake. Ethan, finally free from the investors, saw the tail end of the scene. He rushed to his mother's side. "Mother, what happened?" "I handled a piece of trash that was stinking up my party." Eleanor spat, her eyes flashing with fury. "You will end your association with that woman, Ethan. Immediately. She is a liability. Your only focus must be on Chloe and your son, the heir to this family. Are we clear? Ethan was speechless. His mother, who he thought was his silent ally in his preference for Victoria, had just publicly cast her out. He was losing control. His allies were turning on him. His creditors were closing in, and his mistress was becoming increasingly unhinged. Later that night, Chloe lay in her bed, listening to the muffled sounds of Ethan arguing furiously on the phone in his study. It was with Victoria. Words like betrayal, stupid mistake, and it's over floated through the walls. Chloe placed a hand on her belly, where her baby gave a gentle kick as if in response. The cracks were showing. The foundation of lies Ethan and Victoria had built was crumbling under the pressure she was so carefully applying. Soon, the entire edifice would come crashing down. The fallout from the charity gala was swift and decisive. Victoria, humiliated and cast aside by both Ethan and his powerful mother, became a ticking time bomb. Her frantic calls to Ethan were now a mixture of tearful pleas and venomous threats. She knew too much, and her fear of being left with nothing was making her reckless. Chloe knew this was the time to spring her final trap. The endgame required a perfect setting, one that would disarm Ethan and force a confession. Working with Jessica and Detective Corrigan, she devised a plan. She approached Ethan 2 days later, her expression troubled. "Ethan, we need to talk," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "My memory, things are coming back in flashes. Nightmares. The boat, the storm. Your face." Ethan's blood ran cold. "What about my face, Chloe? You looked so scared," she said, the lie tasting like ashes in her mouth. "You were shouting, reaching for me. And then I fell. It's all so confusing. I feel like I need to go back, not to the ocean, but to a place that was ours, a happy place, to see if it helps me remember the good things." She looked at him, her eyes pleading. "Do you remember that little lakeside cafe in Willow Creek where you proposed? Could you take me there, just the two of us? I need to feel safe with you again." It was a brilliant move. Requesting to go to the site of their happiest memory would allay his suspicions. It was the action of a wife trying to heal, not one setting a trap. He saw it as an opportunity to reinforce her faulty memories of the accident, to cement his narrative of the tragic hero. "Of course, my love," he said, his relief palpable. "Whatever you need." What he didn't know was that Detective Corrigan and his team had already swept the cafe. The quaint, rustic establishment was now outfitted with high-fidelity audio and video recording devices covering the lakeside patio where Ethan had proposed years ago. Jessica was parked a quarter-mile away in a surveillance van monitoring the feeds. The next afternoon, Ethan and Chloe sat at a secluded corner table on the patio overlooking the tranquil water. Chloe was wearing a simple maternity dress and a small, innocuous-looking brooch on her collar, a gift from Jessica containing a state-of-the-art microphone that broadcasted on a secure channel. "It's just as beautiful as I think I remember," Chloe said, looking out at the lake. "It is," Ethan agreed, reaching across the table to take her hand. "We were so happy here." "We were," Chloe said, her voice soft. She then looked directly into his eyes, her expression shifting from nostalgia to deep, soul-crushing sadness. "So why did you do it, Ethan?" He flinched, pulling his hand back. "Do what? The policy? Ethan, the $5 million policy. The one you took out 2 weeks before you pushed me into the ocean." The calm, direct accusation hit him like a physical blow. The color drained from his face. "Chloe, what are you talking about? Your memory is confused. We've been through this. It was a tragic accident." "Was it?" She pressed her voice, remaining level, devoid of hysteria. That's what made it so chilling. "My memory isn't confused anymore. It's crystal clear. I remember the argument. I remember asking you about Victoria. I I remember the look on your face when you told me I was worth more to you dead. That's insane. He hissed, his eyes darting around the nearly empty patio. You're not well. The trauma has made you delusional. Have I been delusional for the past 6 months, Ethan? Or was I just waiting, she asked. Waiting for the right moment to watch you squirm. Waiting for the right moment to take back my life. To take back my son's life. Panic gave way to arrogance, the classic defense of a narcissist cornered. A cruel smirk twisted his lips. You can't prove a thing. It's the word of a woman with documented amnesia and trauma against a beloved public figure. Who do you think they'll believe? There were no witnesses. It was just you, me, and the ocean. That's where you're wrong, Chloe said, her voice dropping to a whisper. There was a witness. Me. And I'm right here. Just as Ethan opened his mouth to retort, a figure appeared at the edge of the patio. It was Victoria. Her hair was a mess, her makeup was smudged, and her eyes held a wild, desperate glint. Jessica, anticipating she might follow Ethan, had tailed her from her penthouse. You're here with her? Victoria screeched, her voice raw with betrayal. You told me you were handling things. Ethan shot to his feet. Victoria, what are you doing here? Get out. I'm not going anywhere, she spat. I'm not going to be the one who takes the fall for you, for our plan. I helped you. I drafted the corporate restructuring plans that hinged on that insurance money. I covered for you with the board. What plan? Chloe asked, sweetly, looking from one to the other. The plan to murder me. The directness of the question made Victoria falter. She looked from Chloe's cold, knowing eyes to Ethan's panicked face. She realized too late that this was not a clandestine romantic meeting. It was a setup. You have no idea what you're talking about, Ethan snarled at Victoria, trying to salvage the situation. You're hysterical. Oh, I'm hysterical. Victoria laughed, a high, unhinged sound. You were the one who called me from the rescue boat, weren't you? Crying your fake tears, telling me, it's done. The problem is gone. You promised me a new life. You promised me everything. In the surveillance van, Jessica pumped her fist in the air. We got it, she whispered into her headset. We got it all. Ethan grabbed Victoria's arm. Shut up. Just shut your mouth. But it was too late. From the entrance of the cafe, Detective Corrigan and 2 uniformed officers emerged, their expressions grim. Ethan Hayes, Corrigan said, his voice booming across the patio. You're under arrest for the attempted murder of Chloe Hayes and for conspiracy and insurance fraud. He then turned his steely gaze to Victoria. Victoria Vance, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder. The world seemed to slow down for Ethan. His eyes locked with Chloe's. In her gaze, he saw no fear, no confusion, no weakness. He only saw the reflection of his own monstrous deeds and the calm, implacable strength of a survivor who had crawled back from a watery grave to pull him down into the depths he had created for her. As the handcuffs clicked shut around his wrists, the sound was as final and absolute as a coffin lid closing. The arrests of Ethan Hayes and Victoria Vance became an immediate media sensation. The story had everything: wealth betrayal, attempted murder, and a miraculous return. The carefully curated image of the grieving widower and the ambitious fiancé was torn to shreds, replaced by the sordid reality of greed and conspiracy. The evidence was overwhelming. Chloe's clear, detailed testimony, corroborated by the full confessions captured on the cafe's surveillance system, left no room for doubt. The digital trail of emails and financial records uncovered by Jessica painted a damning picture of premeditation. Ethan's lawyers attempted an insanity defense, claiming the pressure of his financial ruin had caused a temporary break from reality, but the jury saw through the charade. Victoria, in a desperate attempt to save herself, turned on Ethan completely, providing prosecutors with even more details of their scheme in exchange for a reduced sentence. She detailed how they had planned the accident for weeks, how Ethan had practiced disabling the yacht's communications, and how he had celebrated with her over the phone just hours after pushing his pregnant wife into the sea. Eleanor Hayes, in a final desperate act to protect the family name, used her vast resources to hire the best legal team money could buy. But even her influence couldn't overcome the mountain of evidence. The trial was swift. Ethan Hayes was found guilty of attempted murder and a litany of fraud charges. He was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole. Victoria Vance received a sentence of 15 years for her role as a co-conspirator. Eleanor was publicly disgraced. The Hayes empire crumbled under the weight of debt and scandal, and the grand estate in Aspen Grove was seized and sold off to pay creditors. Chloe watched the proceedings from a distance, choosing not to attend the trial in person. She had faced her monster. She didn't need to see him in a cage. Her focus was on the future, on the new life kicking inside her. 3 months after the verdict, in the quiet early morning hours of a bright spring day, Chloe gave birth to a healthy baby boy. She named him Samuel in honor of the quiet, kind fisherman who had saved them both. Holding her son for the first time, Chloe felt a profound sense of peace wash over her. The cycle of pain and revenge was over. This was a new beginning. She did not stay in the city that held so many dark memories. With the portion of the marital assets awarded to her in the divorce, which was finalized while Ethan was in custody, she bought a modest but beautiful house on the coast, not far from where Samuel and Martha lived. It had a large garden and a view of the ocean. For some, the ocean might have been a source of trauma, but for Chloe, it was a reminder of her survival. It had tried to take her, but it had also delivered her to safety. It was a symbol of both her ending and her rebirth. Her sister Jessica moved to a nearby town to be closer to her, becoming a fixture in their lives, a loving aunt to little Sammy. Chloe reconnected with her passion for books, volunteering at the local library and leading a children's story hour. She found joy in the simple things, the warmth of her son's hand in hers, the salty air on her face during walks on the beach, the quiet companionship of true friends and family. She was no longer just Chloe Hayes, the victim. She had shed that identity like a second skin. She was Chloe, a mother, a survivor, a woman who had walked through the darkest depths of betrayal and emerged into the light, stronger and more resilient than before. One afternoon, as she sat on her porch watching Sammy take his first wobbly steps on the grass, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Detective Corrigan. It was a picture of the pear-shaped diamond ring now sitting in an evidence locker. Its fire and brilliance dulled under the sterile lighting. The subject line read, "Case closed." Chloe smiled, a genuine, unburdened smile. She deleted the message without a second thought. The ring, the mansion, the lies, they were all part of a story that was no longer hers to carry. Her future was not in diamonds and deceit, but in sunlight, sea air, and the sound of her son's laughter. The storm was finally truly over, and in its place was the calm, beautiful, and hard-won peace she had so bravely reclaimed. What a journey of resilience and vengeance! Chloe's story is a powerful reminder that the deepest betrayals often come from those we trust the most, but it also shows the incredible strength of the human spirit. She was pushed into the darkness, left for dead, but refused to be a victim. Instead, she transformed her pain into a strategy, her vulnerability into a weapon, and reclaimed not just her life, but her power. This story proves that sometimes the most satisfying justice isn't loud and explosive, but quiet, meticulous, and brilliantly executed. Have you ever witnessed a situation where someone's true colors were so dramatically revealed? What would you have done in Chloe's position? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of survival and retribution resonated with you, please give this video a thumbs up. Share it with someone who loves a story of ultimate justice, and make sure you subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell. You won't want to miss our next real-life drama.